what are those areas that you have the greatest opportunity for growth, and you have a certain level of talent. In other words, I'm not going to spend, I got lots of room to grow in my singing, but even, I don't have the talent.
Right.
You know what I mean? So it would be, even though, I could improve a lot, I just don't have the talent to do it. So
right.
I'm not going to spend time there. You know? I want to spend time on what I need in order to succeed in what I'm doing, what I'm called to do. And then I want to spend time in the areas that are going to have the greatest return. Hey guys, welcome to the Troy Gramling podcast. I'm so glad you decided to join us on today's episode. And our heart's desire is for you to reach your potential. It's the reason we do the podcast. It's the reason we do the live stream. It's the reason that we wrote the book. And I hope it's been an encouragement to you. And I just want to thank everybody who's went out, and whether it's been online or your local bookstore, and picked up a copy. And if you haven't, now's a good time to do that, because I do think it'll be an encouragement to you. Don't forget to subscribe and do all of those things. Share it with somebody, because today we're actually going to talk about how do we reach our capacity? What role does personal growth actually play in success, in reaching our potential, in being what God has created us to be? And I once again want to welcome our student pastor, Mr. Carson Gramling.
Yes, I am excited to be here.
Yes, and I don't know if you've caught us on any of past podcasts, you might notice something a little bit different.
I've lost weight. Yes, I'm glad you've noticed.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
On losing weight, but there's something else that I've noticed a little different about you.
Really?
Yeah, it's your hair.
Ah, yes. Yes, it is a little different. It's a lot shorter.
It's a lot shorter.
And it's a lot brighter.
It's a lot brighter. And tell us why.
We are doing a challenge for camp. Hashtag YC24 look. Basically, this is our camp look. We're challenging all the kids and leaders to do their own camp look, which points may or may not be offered.
Are they going to do the same color or?
No, they can get as creative as they want, but it does have to be significantly different than how they currely look. With parents' permission.
That's a good one. Yes. Anybody else yet follow your example?
We've had one person. We just posted it today, so we'll see over the next couple days. Things like this take a little time.
Yes.
And so we'll see over the next couple days.
You might have to do a little work to get parents' permission.
Yes.
I look forward to seeing those pictures along the way.
Me too.
Well, thanks for joining us today. I thought we'd talk a little bit about personal growth, talk about capacity, because there's always that temptation to reach a certain point and then be satisfied, or to believe that only certain people can succeed, and to be discouraged by our limitations. Mm-hmm. And so I thought we would start there. And, you deal with students. You've raised up a lot of people. I'm not sure when people are going to be listening or watching this, but one of the folks on your team actually taught this weekend. And so what are some of the things that are important to you when it comes to reaching your capacity or reaching your potential?
I think really that for me, the biggest thing that comes to mind with capacity is the only real way to find that is to go beyond what you think you're capable of doing. Right. And so in sports, the only way to find how much you're capable of is what do you feel comfortable with? And let's go a little beyond that. And I think the same is true in leadership. You know what I mean? When it comes to leading people, leading teams, companies, businesses, ministries, whatever it may be, really the only way to find that capacity is to say, hey, where are we comfortable? What's a step beyond that? What's 2, 3, 5, 10 steps beyond that? And let's see how that does for us. And I think a big thing that can be scary about reaching our potential or reaching our capacity is the fear of, well, what if that's too much? When you take on a lot, it's one thing to fail in a small task that a lot of people may not notice. It's another thing to fail on a large scale where everyone's going to see it because you brought a lot of attention to yourself by kind of scooching further down the field. And so I think that's kind of the challenge for me. And that's what I try and keep in mind when it comes to capacity is really the only way to find it is to go beyond what I'm currently comfortable with doing.
Yeah. There's a principle called the Peter principle. It's where you elevate somebody beyond their ability. You know what I mean? So in other words, you're good at being a salesperson, so we make you manager. And then you're not good at that and you actually fail. So I think one of the ways to do what you're saying, I think, is to do that on our own. In other words, instead of trying to convince our supervisor or our boss to give us more, it's to take on more, you know, and sometimes we can do that before we take that big, you know, risk where it's sink or swim, so that we can get some sense of confidence of stretching ourselves. You know, it's like if somebody wants to be a speaker, you know, you don't necessarily want to speak on the weekend first time, you know, or wait until somebody gives you a platform to speak. Maybe you build your own platform. Maybe you start a small group. Maybe you go to Toastmasters, or, you know, there's so many different groups that you can actually become a part of that you can grow as a communicator, but you can also see where your giftedness is, you know, and because I think sometimes when it comes to capacity, we're always waiting for somebody else to discover it or to grow it, you know, to help us with our personal growth, as opposed to actually taking it on ourselves. And I know that can make a big difference. I know long before I ever even became a pastor, you know, I spoke at, I guess the first time, and because I was always shy, and, at chapel, and when I was in college, actually, you know, or giving a speech in speech class. And you kind of learn a lot about not just do you want to do it, but are you gifted at doing it? Right. You know what I mean? And what do you need to improve on? And I think you can do that with leadership. You know, you can lead in a small, again, coach a little league team, or take on some kind of volunteer at the PTA or what, I don't know if they still have PTA, but those kind of environments, and learn what you do well. And then when you get that opportunity, you know, you're more likely to know what you need in order to succeed. Absolutely. Failure is always, you know, there's always the potential that, you know, you might not hit a home run, but you know, you don't want to go out there never having a bat in your hand. Yeah, absolutely. Well, you know, and I think kind of what you talked about there, there has to be a love for the process of growing, of growing into your capacity. You know, it's cliche. You hear a lot of people say it, that idea of loving the process, like learning to love that process. But it really is, it's cliche because it's true, right? Like you've got to enjoy that process. The goal can't be so focused on just getting to the end, on just reaching the capacity, on getting to the end, you know, the prize, because that's short-lived. You know, it's really the process that takes up the majority of the time. And so I think it's learning to love that process. You know, as a person, as an individual, I'm not wired in a way. I don't love confrontation. It's not how I'm wired. I'm a people person. I love everything being good with people. And one of the things I've had to learn is how to be honest, how to have challenging, confrontational conversations. And, you know, I think that for me, it was really learning to enjoy the process of getting better at it. Even though actually doing it was not a whole lot of fun, learning to enjoy getting better at something made it to where every conversation just felt like a new opportunity to get a little better. So, I wasn't focused on, man, I can't wait till I'm like this person or like that person, because they can do those challenging conversations so easily. It was every conversation is getting me a little bit better and a little bit better. And once I started to embrace that process of growing into my potential, it just made it a lot easier. It didn't feel like I was trying to rush somewhere. Yeah, we tend to focus on talent or capacity than we actually do the process. Yeah. I remember in college, I had a basketball coach, and it's always stuck with me. And part of the reason I even wrote the book is he drew two lines, and he said, you know, we're going to play a lot of teams this year that have higher capacity than us. They've got more talent. Their guys are taller. They may be quicker. You know, they have the potential to be better than us. They just have the talent, the giftedness. He said, but that's not going to determine whether they win or not. He said, what's going to determine who wins the ball game is how much of our potential we actually capture. Right. You know, in other words, if you may have, you know, 100% talent, but you only reach 60% of it. And I may only have 80% talent, but if I reach 75% of it, I'm going to beat you. Right. You know? Absolutely. Well, and it's funny because the way I often think about it, which can hurt my process, my capacity,
is you tell a story like that of, how that coach, and I can almost hear it, like it's like inspiring, motivational. Like we're going to work harder. And then you've told the story before about how there was a team that was better, but y'all just outworked them and ended up winning in the end. And I think sometimes it can feel like those happen one after another. It's like, so, okay, we can be better. So we're going to be better next time than the others. And it really doesn't work like that, right? Like there were practices you had along the way that were discouraging, that were frustrating, that we're trying to work through this. And, if we're going to outwork, then there were practices that I'm sure were no fun at all and were incredibly difficult, because it always takes a process. And I think embracing that is what allows you to, I don't want to say end up where you want to be, because that doesn't really happen. You don't just wander there, but it's not it doesn't take all of your brain capacity. That's all you're thinking about this is where I'm going to be. It's kind of just enjoying the moments along the way of getting a little bit better.
Yeah, you have to put a lot of trust in the process.
Yeah.
Our coach taught us a matchup zone. Nobody else was playing a matchup zone. And we didn't know exactly how to play that, right? So we had to learn how to play it. So,
right.
Like you were saying, there was a lot of practice involved in that. We weren't good at it at first. And so we had to trust the process. And then we had to trust our leader, that he knew what he was talking about. And then, towards the end of the year, we won the conference that year. And we won it because of our defense, because of the matchup zone that we played that nobody else was playing. And therefore, they didn't know how to go against it. And, towards the end of the year when we were playing that team that had a ton of 7-footers, and he said, we're just going to push it to full court and tire them out. And we were down 10 points at halftime. He said, but trust me, trust the process.
Yeah.
And we did, and we won the game. And I think, we talked a few weeks back about perseverance, and, when it comes to capacity or when it comes to personal growth, you still are talking about perseverance. You're talking about, it begins with discipline. Well, maybe it begins with the belief in that you can grow, that you can get better. Right. But then it takes the discipline in the process, like you're saying, to actually attain it and experience it.
Yeah. Well, and like you said, like there's this growth process that gets you to where you want to be, where, God wants you to be. But I think that there's like you said, a belief that you have to have. And it's a belief in the process. It's a belief in the coach, the boss, the supervisor, whoever it may be, that they're going to help you get there. And I think it's also a belief that you're not there yet. You know what I mean? I think that there's a humbling process that has to happen, that there is growth that needs to happen. And I find that we can all accept the fact that growth needs to happen. Where we can struggle is agreeing on how much growth needs to happen. So what would be for you if you were talking to someone who, very few people would say, I don't need to grow, I'm already there. But there may be some disagreements in how much effort needs to be applied to growth based on where you're currently at. What are some things that you've been able to do to bring some self-awareness to yourself to really be able to see, okay, how much growth do I need in this area?
I think when it comes to me, I think it's where do I put myself? And what I mean by that is, what am I reading?
Okay.
So, as you read something, you're always going to kind of compare yourself to that. Mm-hmm. Am I doing those things? Am I disciplined like that? Am I thinking that way? I mean, I remember reading a book by Coach K, the Duke coach who's recently retired, but, he won a ton of national championships and everything. And I just remember as I read that book, he would be coaching for 5 games later.
Yeah.
He wasn't just coaching for that game. And that really challenged me because, it's so easy to get caught up in today's game, what you're leading in, whatever it is that you're doing today, as opposed to thinking, how can I lead today so as to be as successful as I can, but to realize in order to win in the future, I got to make some decisions today. And so reading that book, it's like, I haven't been doing that. I got to think about that. So I think, and then who you put your people around or the people you put yourself around, because if you put yourself around people that think, or act or respond less than you, and I don't mean that in the sense that they're not as important, but I'm just mean maybe they're not stretching themselves to think in bigger concepts, or maybe they're not disciplined or whatever it is. You want to put people around you who, again, when you look at them, and they're talking about getting up at 5 to go to the gym, it's easy to say, well, I'm not doing that, or I am doing that. Or they're talking about what they read or what they watch. And so I think personally, one of the best ways to do it is who you put yourself around and what you read and what you listen to. And, you don't want so much of a distance that you get discouraged,
right?
That you think, oh, I could never get there.
Right.
So you kind of want a mixture of people, some people that you can teach that aren't yet where you are, some people who are just ahead of you, and then some of the folks that you dream or hope to become one day.
Right.
And sometimes, a lot of times those aren't going to be like personal interactions. They're going to be through a book, or they're going to be through making sure that you go to a conference.
Yeah.
I've always, especially when I was younger, intentionally went to as many conferences, as I could, make whatever sacrifice I needed to do, come up with whatever money, Steph and I needed to come up with so that we could go and, again, learn, stretch our capacity. And then I would say that when it comes to helping other people, we all have a tendency to want to tell. And I think the best way to help somebody else understand their need for growth is just to ask questions.
Yeah.
Because then you're forced to reflect.
Yeah.
If I just tell you something, then you can push back. You can say that it's not true.
Right. Disagree.
Yeah. All those things. But if I just start asking you questions, about what do you think about this? Have you read this? What did you think about what so-and-so said? What, now all of a sudden you're being forced to deal with
absolutely
where you're at. And so I think, but you have to discipline yourself to do that, because it's quicker just to tell.
Say it. Yeah.
And I'm like, here's what you need to do. You need to discipline yourself, or you need to read more. You need to, whatever it is, depending on who the person is, as opposed to start asking questions and let them come to it. And I think that is an important concept when it comes to mentoring or coaching or teaching. Is it's not to get people to do the right thing. That's important, but it's to get them to think the right thing. And that's a lot more difficult. Because if I just get you to do the right thing as your father or a pastor or a business leader, whatever it is, coach, then when I'm no longer there, you're going to do what you're thinking.
Right.
If the only reason you're doing it is because of my presence.
Yeah.
Or my influence even.
Right. You could even argue, if you can get people to think the right thing, you don't have to try and get them to do the right thing.
Right.
They'll find that. I mean, you can give tips along the way to maybe speed up the process, or, make it less painful for them. Right. That's the goal, is you're able to help them not go through the same challenges you went through. But if you can get them to think the right thing, you're kind of in a good spot, because they'll find that path the same way you did, or the people before you did. But it's so true. You got to get them to think the right thing, rather than just do the right thing.
And when we say think the right thing, we're not saying think what we think, or do what we do.
Right.
I mean, the Bible's pretty cool. When you think about all the times in Scripture that the Bible, for example, the Bible says that we need to dress modesty, but it doesn't tell us what modesty is.
Right.
Right. So the Bible's trying to challenge us to think, to wrestle, to come up with that decision on ourselves. And it does the same thing with, the Bible tells us not to be drunk, but it doesn't give us a 0.05 or, whatever. It just says don't, not to be drunk, not to be out of control. It doesn't talk about marijuana. It doesn't talk about cocaine or whatever the, latest drug is. It just says that we don't need to be outside the control of ourselves. And so even Scripture, while there are some things, in any role in leadership, you say, hey, listen, just, if you're going to be part of this organization, you don't do this.
Right.
But I think when we're challenged to reflect and to think through, why do I need to work out? Why do I need to read? Why do I need to work on my relationships? Why do I need to become why is communication important?
Yeah.
If I can do that by asking questions and you can reflect, and then you decide the communication is important, then that's going to positively impact every area of your life. And so I think when you're trying to help other people reach their capacity, questions is the way to go.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And as you said, sometimes it can avoid so much conflict and back and forth. And, it's easy when we're talking about ourselves, when you talk about reaching capacity, it's not just about what we do, it's about who we are. And those conversations are not easy because they're so personal, right? And I think that questions allow you to work through that a lot better, I would say, than just telling someone something. Because now you have to deal with how they heard it, how they felt about it, what they thought you said. Whereas when you ask questions, they do all that themselves. And then you just kind of get to guide, and it's also, to be honest with you, it's an easy way to back out if you're wrong. You know what I mean? If you're not in the right and you saw something the wrong way, you didn't commit too much. Now you're stuck in that. So it's definitely the way to go.
Yeah. Well, because you're gaining knowledge even as you ask the question.
Right.
You're not assuming things for sure. You know, I was thinking about what are some of the things that are obstacles to reaching our capacity or living our potential, personal growth. And I think one of the things for me is success.
Yeah.
You know, can get in the way of growing. It's like that sense of I have arrived.
Yeah.
You know, we see it in professional sports when somebody gets the big contract.
Yeah.
It's like, you know, I've got $100 million and all of a sudden they're not playing as well.
Yeah.
And, you know, not everybody's going to make $100 million,
Yeah.
but I think however you define success, you know, for some people it's they get married, you know, and because you hear people say, well, that's not the person I married. You know, it's because all of a sudden they got married. They felt, you know, I accomplished it. And so they quit growing.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you know, I think we've probably all seen that in some context within ourselves and within people around us. So, you know, you finally get the job that you've been working so hard for and all the things that you said you would never do if you got it and you would never stop. And then you get it. And it's just so easy to let off the gas. I think that's a hard thing is, you know, capacity. It's not, even though we have this capacity that God's created us with, you're constantly breaking through what your current capacity is, right? It's not like from the time we were born, we had already that capacity. We grow into it and you're breaking new walls down and going through new barriers. And I think that sometimes you can stop after you've broken through a few because, you know, like you said, depending on who you're hanging around, you're doing better than they are. And you're around majority of the people you're around, you're in a better position and maybe you're making more money. You have a bigger house, whatever it may be. It's really easy to no longer chase that capacity. And I found that through every wall you break through, you know, when it comes to capacity, the next one costs more and more.
And it's more difficult. I mean, if you think about, like, again, I tend to think about athletics, but if somebody's an 85%, well, let's say they start out as a 60% free throw shooter.
Yeah.
Well, they've got 40% that they can improve on.
Right.
And then they work on it all summer. So now they're 85% free throw shooter. Well, to continue to, increase their capacity or increase their potential, now they've only got 15%.
Yeah.
So it's harder. You know, I know it's like if you're a reader, the more you read, the harder it is to read something that challenges you because you've read so much.
Yeah.
So you have to, it's easy to pick up a book and say, I read, read the first 2 chapters and think, I know that. And you put down the book, where when you first started, everything you read was like, oh man, I hadn't thought of that, or that's new, or that's fresh, where now maybe you have to read 8 chapters for 1 paragraph.
Yeah.
That challenges you. So I think there's a tendency, like you're saying, to get soft, to get comfortable. But I also think the challenge is, it's challenging because it's more difficult.
Yeah.
And maybe sometimes we don't give enough credit to that. If somebody's a good communicator, if they go from being an okay communicator to being a good communicator, or an okay leader to being a good leader, they've just got less room.
Right.
So it takes, like you said, the price is higher because it's more difficult.
Right.
And we often don't think about that. We think, well, I'll pay the same price. But, it's like I was watching Lion, my grandchild, your nephew, he's 5.
Yeah.
And he's at he's playing basketball at 5. I didn't play till 6th grade, but he's playing at 5. Well, he's got tons by the time he's 10, he's going to be so much better than he is right
Absolutely.
now. But as he continues to improve, that improvement is going to be less and less and less because there's just not as much room.
Right.
But he's going to have to work more and more. That's why when you heard about, the Kobe Bryants and those kind of people in the past, hours and hours and hours in the gym, even after they had been successful. Well, it's because they had to if they were going to improve at all, because they were already so good. And
Absolutely.
Leaders are the same way. Communication's the same way. Marriage, got a good marriage, you want a great marriage, it takes more work.
Absolutely. Well, and sometimes it's certain things in your life are not even progressing. It's just not letting them slip backwards. You know what I mean? I don't think that every aspect of our life is always progressing. Sometimes there's seasons where one area is really going forward, but we can't let the other one slip. Mm-hmm. And that can be a challenge. Sometimes it can be hard to be motivated by that of, okay, this is not the season for this area to go from a 9 to a 9.2. You know, you think about the analogy you gave of free throw shooter. You know, it's like a Steph Curry or Ray Allen. I remember just seeing a lot of videos of them practicing free throws. I don't think their free throw percentage went up from that practice, but it stayed where it was, which allowed them to, when they got better in other areas, their game didn't, you know, one area go up, one area go down. It all kind of rose up together. And so I think that, you know, it's always about finding the will to keep going, even if it's not progressing, like you said, the rate it was when you started.
And you think about our resources when it comes to capacity or potential. It's time, it's money, it's energy.
Yeah.
And so you're always judging what's your return. Yeah. So like in sermon preparation, when I first start, I'm spending these hours, I'm getting a lot of return because I'm just starting. Right. You know, it's like, okay, what's the scripture say? And how can I apply it? And what, you know, do I want a prop or an illustration or whatever? So, man, every hour I put in, I'm getting a big return from that.
Yeah.
Then there's a certain point in the teaching where I could spend 2 or 3 more hours and I might improve it. But the improvement is so small, it's not worth the investment.
Absolutely.
And, you know, it's like if you're shooting 92% from the free throw line, you don't want to go backwards, but so you got to kind of weigh what's the investment so I can improve in these other areas where I have more room.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes people don't, you know, especially if you're a perfectionist, you just tend to just, I want to make it perfect. And it's like, well, maybe that's not the best return on your time, your effort, your resources. You only read so many books. You can only go to so many conferences. You can only spend so much time. And I think sometimes we forget to think about it that way.
Absolutely. No, I agree. Absolutely. We can waste time trying to get something from that 95 to 97 rather than maybe it's time to step into a new area and grow that 20 to a 40 or a 60.
Yeah. So I think it's important if you're listening or watching today is to think through what are the areas in which you have the greatest opportunity to grow. You know, is that in a relationship? Because they're all important when it comes to success, you know, however you want to define that at work, at home, you know, in our own personal lives. What are those areas that you have the greatest opportunity for growth? And you have a certain level of talent. You know, in other words, I'm not going to spend, I got lots of room to grow in my singing, but even, you know, I don't have the talent.
Right.
You know what I mean? So it would be, even though, you know, I could improve a lot, I just don't have the talent to do it. So I'm not going to spend time there. You know? I want to spend time on what I need in order to succeed in what I'm doing, what I'm called to do. And then I want to spend time in the areas that are going to have the greatest return. And sometimes that means what's most important to what I'm doing. You know, if I'm a communicator, then it might be in communicating. But is it illustrations? Is it in clear communication? Is it in my accent? What area of that do I need to spend the majority of my time? So I just want to encourage folks to think through in what area of your life do you have this opportunity? And then what would be the return if you were to improve in that area of your leadership or relationship with a friend or your spiritual life or in whatever it is that you might be pursuing, and stretch. Don't be afraid to be uncomfortable.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that, you know, sometimes you can be kind of envious of what your talent is versus what someone else's is and what you wish yours was. And I think you can easily find yourself, and I've, you know, absolutely found myself running after things that aren't my talent, but I wish they were. You know what I mean? I try and make them my talent just because I want to be good at this or good at that. And it ends up being, you know, quite a waste of time.
Right. You got to decide what's the return. And maybe if it's just for fun, you know, if it's golf or something to that effect, maybe there's some value in that, but you do really have to think about those kind of things. And I remember a long time ago, I heard Ed Young say, got to be willing to be comfortably uncomfortable, you know, to be comfortable in the uncomfortableness of growth.
Yeah.
And I'm sore today from going to the gym, you know, but I got to be comfortable in that soreness in order to be able to stay strong.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to encourage all of our listeners and all those who are watching on YouTube, don't settle for where you are. You were created for greatness. It's important to know that. I've said it a million times. You're intentional. You're not an accident. You're not a surprise. You're intentional. So I don't know necessarily what books you need to read, although I do know one, I don't know what podcast you need to listen to, although I do know one, right? I don't know who you need to invite into your life, who you might need to invite out of your life. But man, don't stay where you are. There's nothing worse than just being medium or lukewarm.
Yeah.
You know, go for the Vente size if we're going to use Starbucks, you know. Or now they have, what's the one now? The
Trenta.
Trenta. The Trenta. Be a Trenta. Hey, I am so glad you joined us today. I do want to remind you, we have a live stream every Sunday night at 7 o'clock. Check it out. We have fun. We have lots of giveaways and lots of cool things happen. That's on our YouTube channel. It's all under my name. Follow us on Instagram, all the stuff. Share, subscribe, and hey, leave a comment. And we will see you next Thursday because we drop a new podcast every Thursday. Have a great day.